Hey guys, how you doing? Hopefully you're doing okay. I'm not going to read through the full article here. It is pretty long. There's a lot of information. I'm just going to give you an overview as well as just read through probably about half of the article. The parts that I do read through, again, I include some horrific details. So I'm going to provide a full trigger warning. This is a horrific case. A Milwaukee grandfather has been sentenced to life in prison for the brutal murder of his 12-year-old grandson last year. And it really was brutal indeed. It involved beating the boy with a mallet as well as a sledgehammer. The scumbag in question is Andres Martina. He's the grandfather. He's going to serve 2 consecutive life sentences for beating his 12-year-old grandson, Andre Smith II, to death with a variety of weapons, including a mallet and a sledgehammer. He was found guilty in May, and sentencing has just taken place. He was found guilty on 1 count each of first-degree intentional homicide, repeated physical abuse of a child resulting in death, neglecting a child resulting in death, child abuse with the intent to cause harm, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. So a litany of charges that he was found guilty of back in May, but most importantly, first-degree intentional homicide and repeated physical abuse of a child resulting in death. So with that, he's got 2 life sentences plus an additional 23 years. Okay, so this guy initially, during the trial, he initially tried to argue that the grandson had pointed a gun at him and thereby he was acting in self-defense. But that was basically dismissed. The prosecution was able to argue that the boy's injuries were way too severe to justify any self-defense argument, and such. It was claimed that the scumbag grandfather became enraged because he thought that the 12-year-old boy had stolen money from him. So I am going to skip through quite a bit of the details, and I'm going to move to the section where it does detail the attack. So again, I'm going to mention a trigger warning at this point. Investigators interviewed the younger brother, who told them his grandfather was angry about missing money, and said that when he could not find it, he started to strike him and his brother in the head with a mallet, a sledgehammer, and a coat rack. So this grandfather was attacking 2 of the boys. The grandfather picked Andre up, choked Andre with a belt, and then threw Andre into the wall, causing Andre to bleed a lot. The defendant took a cane, the scumbag grandfather took a cane, and began to strike Andre, as well as Andre's younger brother, in the head with the cane. The great-grandmother was at the home at the time, but she was disabled. She was in no way to intervene. The defendant struck Andre with a mallet to every part of Andre's body. Andre was bleeding on the ground from the defendant's action when the defendant stomped on Andre's stomach. The defendant also used a sledgehammer to strike Andre. After beating Andre incessantly, the defendant carried Andre's body into the bathroom and attempted to rinse the blood off in the shower. Andre's body would not stop bleeding. So that's a quote from the grandmother, who was present but wasn't able to intervene due to disability. The grandmother also said that the attack went on for an hour to an hour and a half. An autopsy conducted by the medical examiner for Milwaukee County determined that Andre's skull was severely fractured, consistent with multiple blunt force blows to the head. The medical examiner also found that Andre also suffered severe injury to the brain and trauma to the back, including hemorrhaging around the kidneys. Following his arrest, the scumbag grandfather admitted to having beaten his grandson, and at one point he said, the grandfather said, that he knew that he was going to kill the boy. In addition to that, the scumbag grandfather has admitted to killing a boy in 1989. So a completely separate incident, a completely separate murder, presumably. And the final bit of information within this article, which is kind of sickening really, is that the scumbag grandfather previously served a 4-year prison sentence after being convicted of homicide by reckless conduct in 1990. Okay, so we don't know the details of that. I'm not sure if that is in relation to killing a boy in 1989. It might well be. But 4 years prison sentence, is that all? For having committed homicide? Homicide. Okay, so there may have been some extenuating circumstances, but that just seems too light, doesn't it? A 4-year prison sentence. I mean, it just doesn't seem right at all. So I'm going to wrap things up at this point, guys. In essence, this is the grandfather, and he killed his 12-year-old grandson to death. He beat him to death viciously using a sledgehammer. I mean, it's just beggars belief. He's been sentenced to life in prison with, I believe it mentioned no chance of parole. Yeah, he's got 2 consecutive life sentences plus an additional 23 years. He won't be getting out, I would imagine. So, you know, obviously we hope that the other inmates have the opportunity to have a nice little word with him from time to time about how he treated his grandson, how he beat his grandson to death using a number of different weapons, including a cane, a mallet, a sledgehammer. Made him endure an hour to an hour and a half worth of beating with multiple weapons. Also attacking the 12-year-old's younger brother. But thankfully, seemingly, we're not really told about the injuries sustained by Andre's 8-year-old brother, although it is mentioned that he was also attacked, but we're not told of his injuries. So I hope that he was able to make a full recovery from whatever injuries he sustained. Going to wrap things up here, guys. If you do value this type of content on this channel, please do like, comment, subscribe, share the video as you see fit. You can buy me a coffee if you like. There's a donation link in the description. I'm going to leave you to it for now. Take care.